Hey, my name is Bo. I'm a musician and music teacher, and in this video, I want to talk about the importance of developing a large musical vocabulary if you're attempting to fulfill your potential as a musician, develop as a musician, however you want to frame it. So, if we are trying to learn an instrument and perform music, our ability to do that is going to largely depend on the size of our musical vocabulary, just like how if we wanted to write a novel or become an author, we're going to need a large vocabulary of words so we can actually express ourselves and express ideas. Now, musically, this is going to come down to a few different things. On the rhythmic side, we're going to need to be able to play in certain meters, but we're also going to need a large variety of rhythmic patterns. So like if we're playing in triple meter, we're going to need a large amount of patterns that we can utilize, whether we're improvising or playing Bach pieces or composing or even just listening to music. Our pattern vocabularies actually really influence how much we can actually listen to music effectively and engage with the music we're listening to. So that's a little bit on the rhythmic side. Now on the tonal side, the pattern vocabularies can get quite absurd. So we have all these different facets of tonality. We have the ability to just play in different tonalities like major and minor and Dorian, and even other kind of non-traditional tonalities like maybe Lydian sharp 2 or like some melodic minor modes. I would consider those a type of vocabulary, but more specifically when we're talking about vocabularies in terms of tonality, can you sing or play arpeggios over certain chord progressions or over, we could call them tonal patterns, but can you play tonal patterns or over specific chord functions in a key? So if we were in the key of C, do you know patterns just off the top of your head that you could sing over a C chord, an F chord, a D7, a G7, an E7, an A minor? And that's going to really influence your ability to improvise for sure. But it also influences your ability to intelligently read sheet music and just engage with another composer's work. If you don't understand these little musical words, it's very difficult to perform effectively. And so there's tonal patterns, there's melodic patterns, so little scale fragments. Da 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 do da do da 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 do da da do. And basically, to become an effective musician or to advance as a musician based on where you are right now, a large part of that is just going to be developing a super big musical vocabulary. Now, the question is, how do we actually develop this musical vocabulary of patterns? Because that's basically what we're talking about here, is we need to learn a lot of different patterns and kind of have them committed to memory. And the process is super similar to how we learn to speak a language. In fact, it's very similar to how you learned to speak your native tongue. So we'll use English as an example, because I don't speak any other languages. But when I was a kid, the way that I learned English was my parents were speaking all around me. My siblings were speaking. I was kind of just saturated, or I was kind of acculturating into the language of English. The sounds were just around me all the time. I had, something like half a year to a full year of just listening to people speak before I even attempted to speak. But what was going on in that period, I was listening a lot and I was coordinating what I was hearing people say with my senses. So what do I mean by that? I mean, I probably heard my parents say the word cup many times, and at some point I associated the word cup, the sound cup, with this actual object. Same thing with other objects, pen, glasses, people, we give our parents names, that kind of thing. So language generally will develop by, we're just naming nouns. We're just naming objects in the world around us. And kids basically just listen to their parents talk. They associate the words that their parents say or their family or whatever with the objects that they see and that they feel with their senses. And then at some point they get involved in the game. Children get involved in the game and they start speaking the words themselves. And that's why when we learn a first language, we are so effective at doing it, is that we largely do not do it theoretically. We're very immersed in the process in a direct way. So it's listening, associating the sounds with the objects around us, and then we get involved in the speaking process. Only later do we really learn the rules of grammar and do we learn to read. And this is actually a fantastic analogy for how we learn to audiate, how we learn to perform music effectively. Now, strictly speaking, music is not a language, but it's a language-like phenomenon, and it's so similar to a language in many facets. I think it's fair to just use a language as an analogy for how we learn music, because in fact, the process that we learn music is super, super similar. Now, one distinction though, is that when I'm a kid and I'm, kind of crawling around and doing my thing, I'm actually engaged with real objects in the world, like cups and shirts and my parents and physical pianos that I'm playing. But then my parents or my family, they will say words that represent those objects. And so I heard my parents say the word cup enough times, and I had felt a cup and bashed a cup around, and those become associated in my mind, and now I can use the word myself to represent it. Now, musically, it's a little bit different because music, we're dealing with a sound-based phenomenon, and what's really going on is when you're learning music, you need to just hear lots of patterns. So for example, I need to hear lots of tonic chords. I need to hear lots of dominant to tonic progressions. I need to hear lots of little scale patterns. Bum, bum, bum. Bum 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 bum, little patterns like that. And those are what I tend to think of those as are musical objects. So just like when we're kids, our senses, like our seeing and our hearing and our tactile sensations, we're exploring the world around us and we're discovering the objects in reality, and we learn to use language to represent those objects. The same thing happens with music. We need to encounter musical objects, and so those could be rhythms, chord progressions, tonalities, meters, scale fragments, arpeggios, all kinds of things like that, all kinds of patterns. There's tons. We could make a giant list of them. But the point is, we need to be immersed in an environment that has a high saturation of different musical objects. Just like if we want a child to develop properly, we want their IQ to develop, we want just their motor skills to develop, they need to be put in an environment where there's lots of things for them to play with, there's lots of objects for them to learn about. Basically, what I'm getting at is if you put a child in just a white room and there was no people speaking, there was no objects for them to play with, there's nothing for them to learn with, their language skills are not going to develop, but also just their cognitive skills are going to not develop very well. And the same thing happens with musicians. If we're trying to learn music and we're not in a musical environment that's just hitting us and bombarding us with all different kinds of rhythms and songs and tonal qualities of instruments, we're not going to be able to develop very well as musicians. And so that's really the first step of developing a large musical vocabulary, is we need to encounter a lot of musical objects just informally around us. Now, at some point, what happens is we start giving those musical objects names, just like we started giving the names of physical objects in our environment. And so I might hear this bum bum bum. I might hear that so much bum bum ba da 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 dum bum bum. That little pattern there, bum bum bum. And I could give it a name. I could call it do mi so, or I could call it a tonic chord. However you want to do it. I could call it C E G. I'm not that concerned if people are using solfege or pitch letters or whatever. At this point, it's just about hearing the sound enough, learning to audiate it, and then giving it a name. And that's what the musical vocabulary is. And so this is one thing that really goes off the rails that can screw people up, is that developing a rich and wide and extremely large musical vocabulary is not about memorizing the names of things. It's about actually audiating the things those represent. So if you just open up a music theory textbook and start memorizing things like melodic minor, I'm on the 2 chord in minor, I'm going to play a Locrian sharp 2, and then on the 5 chord, I'm going to play the altered dominant. That could sound like you're developing some kind of theoretical or musical vocabulary, but if you don't actually have those sounds like burned into your mind and burned into your audiation, the labels themselves don't do anything. Just like if you don't speak German, but you open up a German dictionary, it uses similar, like a Latin alphabet. It uses very similar structure to English in a lot of ways. You could kind of read those words, but you don't know what those words represent and what those words mean. And that's actually the process you need to go through when you're learning vocabulary. Learning vocabulary is not a matter of just memorizing how words are spelled, memorizing how to say them. It's associating what those words actually mean. And musically, the way we have to go about this is we have to engage with music on a sound-based level. So if you want to build a large vocabulary of musical scale little patterns, melodic fragments you can improvise with, you can't just learn that stuff theoretically. You can't just learn the pitch letters or even the solfege name. You can't learn like, okay, on a tonic chord, I can go do, mi, so. That's not good enough. You actually have to know the sound and have the sound of the pattern and better yet, even the audiation of the pattern committed to memory. And so how do you do this? You need to engage in repeated listening. So the way that I like to think about this, there's 2 ways you can approach this. There's informal learning and there's more formal learning. So with informal learning, we're kind of just listening to songs, singing along with them. And that's actually quite effective in terms of developing a good musical vocabulary. If you sing enough songs in major, just by definition, if you sing with those songs, and you could even sing those songs from memory, you have to have had some of those patterns committed to memory, and that'll start seeping through in your improvisation. That'll start assisting you while you're trying to learn how to like perform a Bach piece. I don't know if you've ever been playing a piece and you're like, oh, these first three notes sound like this other song. If that's happening to you, that is proof that you are audiating the pattern and you're bringing that pattern up from your kind of deep subconscious memory, and it's helping you learn a new piece. So on the informal side, we can just listen to music. We can just sing along with music. We can just play along with music very simply. Some kind of repeated listening and repeated playing tends to help the patterns get stuck. But on the more formal side, we can actually intelligently put patterns into our mind from more of an architect's position, from more of a planning position. So I can say, okay, I want to learn how to solo over Dorian better. Maybe you can play over the tonic chord, but you're not very good at getting in like the subdominant chord or whatever, however you want to frame it, the dominant chord or the four chord. And you maybe don't have a lot of patterns to play over Dorian. We can purposely put patterns in our mind. So what I could do, I could say, let's just find Dorian for a second. So I could say, I could play this on the piano, repeat it, boom, 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 boom. Now, again, where the wheels kind of fall off the bus is that it's very easy to do the process I just did, 1, 4, 1, and the subdominant chord. And just because you can play it on the piano doesn't mean you can actually audiate it. So you can actually do everything I just did completely theoretically. You can say, well, D Dorian has a D minor chord, and then I got to go to a G chord for the four chord, and then I got to go D minor, and then I got to go C chord. Now, there are musicians that can audiate that and describe it theoretically, but many times what happens with beginners is they only scratch the surface of something theoretically and they don't actually audiate it. So how do you actually commit those as patterns? What I would do is I would take four chords like this, little tonal patterns or arpeggios. I would make a recording where I play that, then I would leave silence so I can sing along with it later. And then I'd play the next one. Leave some silence so I can sing along with it. So the recording is going to have these little tonal patterns with some silence, tonal patterns with a few seconds of silence. Then later, I'm going to hit play on the recording while I'm walking the dog or whatever, and this is what it will look like. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. And I might repeat that several times, and then maybe at the end of the recording, I will leave a little prompt for myself. Sing everything from memory. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. A really important thing to understand is that you need to commit these things to memory, because if you can just imitate a pattern after you hear it, that is fantastic. That's proof that you're getting in the game and you're audiating it. But what's really going to allow you to unlock the power of learning patterns is having these patterns committed to memory, and not so much theoretically. So the theory is good. I'm not against music theory at all, but we need to not put the cart before the horse, and we need to make sure we're focusing on audiation specifically. And in my mind, I mean, the way you can prove to yourself that you're audiating it is, one, if you can sing it. Because if you can sing it, it really provides feedback to yourself and even your teacher that you are audiating the right notes. If you're having to go, if you're having to scoop up to the notes, what's happening is you're not actually audiating what you're doing. You're listening to your own voice and correcting it after the fact. Boom, boom, boom. If you're able to sing those right bang on, it's proof that you're audiating. And it has nothing to do with being a good singer. I mean, the quality of your singing voice could sound like garbage, but we're trying to use singing as a way to enhance our audiation. And then, so that's step one, just being able to repeat the pattern. But what I've noticed is a lot of people don't go to the next step, which is probably the most important step, is actually committing these things to memory. So once you can copy the recording and you can hit the pitches bang on, try singing the whole set of patterns from your memory. Because when you want to improvise or compose, or you're playing a piece in Dorian, if these things aren't actually solidified in your memory, they're not going to be usable. It would be like me trying to write, maybe I'm in university and I'm writing an English essay and I want to use a word, but I can't remember it. I mean, it's functionally not usable. So this is actually the difference between your listening and reading vocabulary and your actual, we could call it your writing or your improv vocabulary. And it's so similar in terms of language and music instruction. So in language, I may have a humongous reading vocabulary and listening vocabulary. If I hear someone talk, they might use words that I wouldn't normally use myself in a conversation, but I completely understand what they're saying. And same thing with reading. My reading vocabulary is going to be quite a bit bigger than my own vocabulary that I use when I'm speaking. And that's how I'm able to understand so many different people talking. But when I'm going to actually write something, my own vocabulary is kind of whittled down a little bit and I don't have as much to play with. The same thing happens musically. You can probably listen to a lot of music, Stravinsky, country music, jazz, whatever, and you understand, you're audiating, you're able to keep up while you're listening. But then I say, okay, sit down in this room and just compose something. Here's a blank piece of music notation. Here's a blank piece of manuscript paper, just compose something or improvise for me. Here's a piano, just improvise something for me. It's very likely that you're not able to improvise or compose with the same level of patterns that you can listen to. And so we have there's a difference between our listening vocabulary and our reading vocabulary versus our composition, performing, or improv vocabularies. Those are all related but subtly different. And so the step that makes sure that we can take things that we're listening to and turn them into usable pieces of musical vocabulary is committing them to memory. And memory's kind of gotten a bad rap it's been a long time now, but the past 30, 40 years in education, memory has gotten a bad rap. I mean, people say things like, I don't just want to memorize things, I want to understand them and learn them. That's fair. I mean, I get the point that they're talking about, but the bigger picture is that what often separates a novice from a master or a beginner from an intermediate is just the fact that they have a ton of domain-specific content memorized. And so what's going to separate the master jazz musician from the beginning jazz musician? They have a ton of patterns committed to memory. And so it's unfortunate in education, memory has gotten kind of maligned and it's treated as something that's kind of something like drill and kill or just like rote learning that's like bad for you for some reason. But just committing a lot of patterns to memory will give you way more options while you're improvising or composing. And so that's just a bit of a crash course on why you want to develop a pattern-based memory, and specifically like a high amount of rhythmic patterns, tonal patterns, and scale patterns. A lot of people, for example, like guitar students I see, they have a lot of melodic patterns in their audiation. They can improvise with little like pentatonic scales or minor scales or whatever, but then when it comes time to play, like really play over chord changes where we're gonna nail the chord changes like 1, 4, 5, 5 of 5, 5 of 2, whatever, they don't have a big enough pattern vocabulary to actually nail the chord changes. And that's kind of the that's kind of the trial and tribulations that any jazz musician who's trying to learn how to play like over bebop tunes or just nail a set of chord changes. In my experience, most jazz musicians are just blown away with like how much work it actually takes, because it's not something you can pick up in just like a couple weeks or like a couple months. This is much more like language acquisition. This takes years to build and develop a vocabulary. And the easiest ways you can do this are listen to lots of music, especially melodically, and sing along with the music. Because if you sing along with the tunes and can sing the tunes without the recording, it's proof that some of those patterns are getting into your musical ear. And then if you want to take the next step and be much more like an architect of what you're working on, what you're learning, make these little recordings. So if there's a chord progression you want to improvise over, but you suck at hearing like the 5 of 5 or the 5 of 2 or like the tritone sub of 5 going to 1, just make little recordings where you play a little arpeggio, or we could call it a tonal pattern if you want, and leave some space for you to sing it back. And then play another one, leave some space for you to sing it back. And if you just listen to these a few times a day, these patterns will start to get in your ear. and you'll be able to use these as you're improvising and as you're composing. So if you have any questions or comments, happy to get into a discussion. I love talking about this kind of stuff. My name is Bo. I offer online guitar lessons. I'm a jazz guitarist and a classical guitarist. I do offer piano lessons as well, but guitar is my main instrument. I also offer coaching for music teachers who are getting involved in Edwin Gordon's music learning theory. It can be quite a subject to digest and learn how to apply properly. And I kind of specialize in teaching and working with teachers to learn how to apply that to teaching guitar effectively or teaching jazz music effectively. And it's been a lot of fun to do some coaching with teachers. So if you're someone who's trying to up your audiation game themselves, or if you're someone who's trying to help students learn to audiate better, shoot me an email and I'd love to set something up with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day.